Welcome back to Breach Report number 5. We're going to start off talking about Stormshield. They had a data breach. Then we're going to talk about some more of the developments on SolarWinds. So Jason, you brought this one to my attention. Why don't you take this one away?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, this one caught my attention. Stormshield discloses a data breach, theft of source code. If you scroll down a little bit here into the first paragraph, so French cybersecurity firm Stormshield, a major provider of security services and network security devices to the French government, said today that a threat actor gained access to one of its customer support portals and stole information on some of its clients. Um, so, we're starting to see more and more of these types of breaches in security companies. And if you scroll down a little bit more here, where the intruders also accessed some customer data, the French security firm said it also reset passwords for its tech support portal, and which the attackers breached, and the Storm Shield Institute portal used the customer training courses, which wasn't breached. So the impact here being that there's about 200 or so accounts out of the 10,000 accounts of their customers, which may seem like a small amount and insignificant, but I mean, really, what caught my attention to all of this was the fact that it was a security firm. And I think in one of our previous episodes, we talked about Malwarebytes being hacked as a result of SolarWinds, and then FireEye themselves being breached. And so I was wondering what's kind of the implications of these security firms being targeted, and is this becoming more common practice?
So to answer the last question first, yes, it's definitely becoming more common practice. I could speculate as to why that is. Probably a combination of things. Of one, those are good targets for numerous reasons, and it's traditionally been harder to breach security companies, but the whole game's getting more sophisticated on both sides, as we've talked about previously. This the whole the Cold War thing, right? So I think it's a little bit of better hackers, definitely more interest in these targets. What's interesting is that you see that the access is through the customer portal. So much like SolarWinds, it's something that starts in a relatively, you know, I don't know if benign is the right word, but kind of a benign area, right? It's not their source code or anything. It's just the portal, but then it can quickly spread. Fortunately, here it looks like it was pretty limited, but it could have been a lot worse. But I think we're definitely going to see more of this.
Yeah, that's that's a pretty scary situation. So let's I guess walk through some of the more the through the announcement from Storm Shield themselves. That was just kind of a primer from ZDNet.
Yeah, it's says pretty much the same thing. It says recently, Stormshield teams detected a cybersecurity incident that resulted in unauthorized access to technical portal used, in particular, by our customers and partners for the management of their support tickets on our products. Personal data and technical exchanges associated with certain accounts may have been consulted, which I believe it they are meaning that they were seen. This is, I think this is a French company, right? So that might
Hmm.
actually just be a little bit of a translation thing right there. We immediately alerted the account owners on the portal and we notified the French authorities. As a precaution, the passwords of all accounts were reset. We applied additional measures to the portal in order to reinforce its security. So they are not seeing any kind of actual data leakage. There's no modification to the code. It was just they detected an access, they reacted quickly, which is good. I would hope so from a security company. So they were
Hmm.
on it really fast. They will continue to bring visibility on this incident depending on the elements that we were able to communicate. One of those we'll see kind of things, I suppose.
Yeah, as always, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's really eerie to me. It seems like you can do a lot of damage by going after some of the firms themselves, and that's why there's a lot of, I wouldn't say secrecy. Maybe secrecy is the right word of clientele that a security company may have.
Or just access. Everybody
Right.
needs
Yeah.
everybody needs them, so you know that there's going to be a lot of people connected to that target.
Yeah. Exactly.
Hence
Um,
SolarWinds.
yeah. Exactly. Speaking of, don't you have something you want to talk about SolarWinds?
We have. we're going to only talk about SolarWinds today. There's
Oh.
three major new things I want to talk about with SolarWinds. So first up is from Sundakar Ramakrishna, which is their CEO. This is on SolarWinds' official blog. Their findings from their ongoing investigations. I'm not going to read this in its entirety because it's a little bit long-winded, but so kind of scrolling past here. They're committed to sharing what they learn. Let's move to the
Man, they
good
could
meat
use
here.
some
So
pictures in there.
yeah,
Brighten it up a little. I mean, I know it's a sour subject, but
yeah, right. Okay, so here's really good stuff. So there's some things I want to point out about their ongoing findings. One of the biggest things that they alerted to this last week is that Office 365 was a major component of their breach,
mm,
and not being a vulnerability in O365, but rather misuse and abuse of the accounts through O365 to gain the foothold into this, as well as to continue the spread and to compromise other clients as well. Some interesting things as well as variation and or disabling of audit logs, timestamps, and other security measures. Pretty common with APTs or really any hack these days. That's, if you shut down the logs, nothing is watching what you're doing. So it really helps hide the evidence. This, by the way, is something that should be a red flag immediately to any kind of threat hunting team is audit logs that have been disabled without authorization. Manipulation of software builds through reusable automated processes, and deployment of novel, sophisticated malware to effect exploitation and malicious goals. We talked about that malware that they had in there, some highly modified Cobalt Strike, the Beacon malware. These things were used to inject into the Orion software. Again, that was the third party module that all these other clients had installed, and there was an updated version that was distributed that had all these bits of malware in there. So that's what they're talking about with this one. They also noticed modification through laundering of legitimate code from malicious code injection and monitoring of disk space and activities before executing or creating files. So I think I can simplify what that's saying a little bit there is basically what they're saying is that these guys were sitting there watching their CI/CD pipeline and making changes as it was being pushed out, which is pretty sophisticated and kind of scary. Deletions of files and programs following use to avoid forensic discovery and masquerading of file names and activity to mimic legitimate applications and files. So they were tricking not only SolarWinds internal security, but once these malicious packages were deployed to the customers, they really had no chance of detecting this beforehand. And again, variation of file names and variation is just it's a constantly changing attack. So they're trying to cover up all their breadcrumbs. These are all these things that are indicative of them being an APT, which we've already talked about them identified as Russia. We have a little bit more development on that too. I'm going to get to that in a moment as well.
so before you do that, I have a question. I have a question.
Absolutely.
You had talked about the main point of entry was Office 365, right? Kind of what did you say? Abusing the system in a way.
Right here. So yeah,
Microsoft wrote so I guess my question is, do you see and let me I guess explain this. Do you see kind of standalone more secure OSs being developed in the future? Because the way I kind of always think about it is I go back to the Mac versus PC, back in like the early 2000s when they were running all of those campaigns. And one of the things that I always used to remember reading in those boards were that Macs were more secure. Well, it turns out that that wasn't so much the case. It was the fact that Microsoft just had more users and a higher user
they were
base.
just less popular.
And exactly, they were less popular. So, is this a case where you get Office 365, which, Microsoft has grown immensely? I mean, in the cloud space over the last decade, they went from going from being like a, third place, behind AWS and IBM, and I don't know if they were behind IBM in particular, but they weren't where they were today. They've
Right.
definitely developed it. So, is there a case where we need to stop using these enterprise? I mean, I know the enterprise is good, but is there a case where we need some custom built stuff?
Um, there is a case for that. So this is kind of a multi-part question here. So number one, and this is something that came from Microsoft as well as from sorry, SolarWinds right here, is there's no specific vulnerability within O365 that caused this. It all looks to be about compromised accounts. So most likely social engineering type things. So that's like the main implication, right? Now, in terms of these popular services everyone has, I mean, everybody has O365. Do you think Apple uses O365 for their business stuff operations? you know,
Probably not,
maybe,
right?
maybe, I don't know. It's pretty awesome, but
Yeah, Office. Hey, guys, Microsoft was more efficient, but don't tell anyone.
so it's ubiquitous, and I don't know if getting rid of it's necessarily the answer. But in terms of developing your own secure OSs, I do think that there comes a point where, especially if you're a security company, you and I don't mean every security company, but there's got to be at some point like SolarWinds, they're developing security products raw, right? That entire pipeline needs to be separate from all third-party integrations. Bottom line, end of story.
Mhm.
Anymore. And that's pretty harsh, and that's a big deal, and that's really hard to do in a large step away from how they're running things now and how most businesses that develop that run things now. But coming from as a DoD ex-DoD person, I would actually have preferred everything was built in-house by a DoD person who built a security system. It'd be cool if they did that. Now, there's obviously reasons why you hire companies like SolarWinds, because they just do software development and they're really good at software development. You don't have to
Right.
pay for all that. But maybe, I mean, maybe we are starting to see an end of an era, though. Maybe what we really need to do, perhaps for most places, for like, schools and stuff, things like SolarWinds, those are probably great. But if you're nuclear power, Department of Energy, DoD, state governments, maybe
Yeah.
the era of third-party vendors it really is over, and all that money needs to be restructured towards developing secure OSs
Yeah.
in-house.
And then it becomes insider threats are the
It goes
biggest.
back to DARPANET, man.
Very, very interesting stuff.
Yeah, this is a really super long post from Microsoft that's uh, SolarWinds linked to here. It's basically saying the same thing. It's just backing up his claims that he made there. But yeah, it's pretty complicated, and some that's why I'm going to talk about this next part here. Is there was also 3 more vulnerabilities found in their products. So in that first blog post, he talked about they actually modified their code. We knew about what was it? SolarGate was really what the first one was called, and that was a mix mash of some malwares. So there's some more ones, right? So security researchers have discovered 3 more vulnerabilities in SolarWinds products, including a critical remote code execution bug. Let's see. The vulnerability patched in December was. Oh, sorry. So they patched this vulnerability in December. This was a newer report that came from them. These are, here we go, CVE 2021-25274, 25275, and 2527. I'm assuming that's 6. It looks like they made a little typo there. So
Missed a number there.
yeah, usually they're, but this is common. You'll see them like right in a row if they discover all 3 at once, right? It's basically this is just the order that they're reported in on those CVE numbers. Um, so the most critical vulnerability, 25274, it relates to the legacy Microsoft Q technology, which is set up on installation and could allow any remote unprivileged user to execute an arbitrary code with the highest privileges. MSMQ, message queuing, it's something that you use for like streaming commands in certain types of programs, depending on how you build them. So it's probably used for reporting what activity is going on to Orion. The second bug, 25275, affects the same part of that product. Um, this company, Trustwave, claimed that SolarWinds credentials are stored in an unsecure manner, which could allow local users to take complete control over a SolarWinds underscore Orion database. In so doing, they could steal data or add a new admin level user inside SolarWinds Orion products. And this is on client side, by the way, what we're talking about here. So if you've got the unpatched version of SolarWinds Orion, that means that if somebody manages to compromise your network, they could steal your admin level credentials out of this database. Finally, there's a SolarWinds Serve You FTP for Windows vulnerability. And on this one, it says any local user, regardless of privilege, can create a file that can define a new FTP admin account with full access to the C drive. This account can then be used to log in via FTP and read or replace any file on the drive. So with these three malware here, and now remember, these malwares were the ones created by APT and injected into Orion. Now on a client system, you've got access to remote code execution through this MSMQ. You can spill admin credentials for the SolarWinds database, and then you're able to set up an FTP server with full control over the C drive and basically just send all of that person's data off into the ether.
Super sophisticated.
Yeah. So, I mean, these guys are writing malware. That's about as sophisticated as you can get. They're making this the viruses. Um, and so, we talked about Russia, and I did kind of give a little teaser that there was more here. And so this is actually an exclusive report coming from Reuters.
Aha, Chinese, I knew it.
Yep, yep. So you asked about this before, and I said, everything is an indicator of Russian APT, which this is still the case, but something, and I'm gonna go ahead and call myself out on forgetting about this entire concept here is it actually could have been both. And it turns out it was most likely both. And this is actually not super uncommon that when one APT enters, another APT might enter. If you're a high value target and you have a vulnerability that they're going to go after, it's likely you could be targeted by multiple groups. Sometimes they'll fight too, and they'll try to patch each other out. It's kind of funny if you're
So the Chinese could be in there and they see Russia's like trying to butt in and they just
right.
kind of try and wall them out.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
vice versa. They try to keep out other people. It's like, no, this is my loot.
Everyone thinks that they're being super agent, sneaky spy stuff. And then it's
Right.
like, no, dude, everyone's here. What are you talking about?
Yeah, so this says suspected Chinese hackers exploited a flaw in software made by SolarWinds to help break into US government computers last year. 5 people familiar with the matter told Reuters directly. So this is kind of as a new twist, as they put it, but it is kind of interesting because we've been focused just on the effect and Russia, but as this has been ongoing, now we find that we've got Chinese APT in there as well. Um, the
Yeah,
software,
the news stories have been all have been alleged Russia or, basically implying it was Russia.
yeah, I
And
mean, a lot of the CNC servers
I
are in Russia.
I'll have to look and see the stories that come out now in the
Mhm.
future if that narrative changes a little bit more or if it continues to just be focused on Russia. I'm just curious to see
That'd be
how
interesting.
that plays out.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to watch that as well. And this is they're
Who are they going to
exclusive,
put the
but
target on?
right. I mean, why not both? And it must be said, in a political sense that they don't necessarily need to be adversaries. They could actually be sharing intel for some reason. I
Mhm.
mean, there's that's not unprecedented for that area and for those two
I mean,
countries.
they're pretty big trading partners because
Yeah,
you got to think about it this way. There's so many different sanctions that are placed on these countries, and so you get a country like in the Middle East that's been sanctioned by the US and can only do business with China or can only do business with Russia. And China and Russia have, you know, a lot of ties because China needs a lot of oil. So,
right.
yeah, I mean, it would make a complete sense if they're deploying some type of espionage against
So what's interesting here
us.
is it looks like the motives are very different. So the
Okay.
initial attack they're putting on Russia is the break into SolarWinds, installation of all this malware. Now what they're talking about here in this exclusive report is that China, the Chinese group that they discovered, were actually exploiting after this fact. So they kind of, after it's been deployed out to all these customers
Oh,
and
they
they have these vulnerabilities,
piggybacked.
they kind of, yeah, whether they piggybacked, whether they were informed. So here it says 2 people briefed on the case said FBI investigators recently found that the National Finance Center, a federal payroll agency inside the U.S. Department of Agriculture (USDA), was among the affected organization. So yeah, this one's a little bit more aimed at financial. Now, one thing we don't know entirely out of the SolarWinds breach is what any sort of Russian APTs may have done to the victims who installed these versions. Where, again, we all the news has been focused on what happened at SolarWinds from Russia. So once this is deployed, though, um, they discovered through this USDA breach that this is actually pretty widespread too. Reuters is not able to establish how many organizations were compromised by the suspected Chinese operation. They did say that the attackers used computer infrastructure and hacking tools previously deployed by state-backed Chinese cyber spies. So that's why. I mean, it could be Russians still using Chinese things, maybe pivoting, but it could be both. It's very interesting. Um, let's see what they say here. So the USDA did notify all customers, including individuals and organizations, whose data has been affected by the SolarWinds Orion code compromise. So there was a confirmed breach there. FBI declined to comment, of course.
Extremely serious breach. Yeah.
So what so seriously, while the alleged Russian hackers penetrated deep into SolarWinds and hit a backdoor in Orion's software updates, which were sent to customers, the suspected Chinese group exploited a separate bug in Orion's code to help spread across networks that had already been compromised.
Yeah.
Man,
Get in while you can. I mean, attacking the top dog, and why not? I mean, what are you gonna do? Like, it's
exactly.
there. The thing is, a lot of people don't understand. Like, this stuff can happen, and it's just kind of tit for tat. And we do it too. The U.S. does it too. And but we're so reliant as a global economy on each other that we can't just you know what I mean? We can't just say
Yeah,
no. We can't just terminate, all of that trade that we do with China. We don't produce anything, and they need our money to
not
keep
overnight.
developing. Yeah.
No,
So
it's you can't shut down a global economy overnight. There's just would never. I don't think that's just untenable, right?
so yeah,
Um,
the retaliation on our side will probably be something in kind in some type of breach, but it's yeah, I'm this
it's
goes
pretty
back to
ominous too.
what
Is
you were
like,
talking about with the Cold War. Yeah, I think go ahead.
yeah, I was just gonna say, it's what they're saying here is they don't even really know how big of a breach it is. So
Yeah.
all this stuff with the solar winds, it's still not all out there. It's like it's just kind of getting worse, right?
It's true.
Yeah, right here it says the NFC services more than 160 diverse agencies providing payroll services to more than 600,000 federal employees.
Mm.
That is
What are they doing with that information? What do they need that information for?
well, my information was part of. Do you remember the hack way back against Equip? The um,
Equip.
yeah, it was the online service portal for filling out your SF-86.
No, I don't remember that one.
So yeah, that was really like the start of this whole China APT thing. That was way back in the day. So but anyway, Equip is where you fill out all of your information to get any sort of government level public trust or clearances or anything like that. So it is, depending on what kind of clearance you're seeking, it could be years worth of data on not just you but anybody that you know. And they found that a Chinese VPN was hooked up to the system and just stole all kinds of people's data.
I
And
see.
it really seems often when it's China, if you don't catch them outright stealing like blueprints and plans from manufacturing, it's financial stuff. And I am curious what they're doing with that. So there was also uh, there was a let's see, no, this one's talking a little bit more about the China one as well. This is also from Wired. So one thing they talked about that's a little bit different here is they emphasize that unlike the Russian hackers who use their access to infiltrate targets, the Chinese hackers um, piggybacked and went after financial stuff. So kind of the same thing. Uh, I guess they're not really adding too much here, but yeah, it's really interesting to see what's going to come out of this. Russia, I can sort of get their motives behind this, but I don't know what they're doing with all of our financial information. But
I think they're just collecting data, and here's why. They have TikTok, right?
yeah,
TikTok is how many hundred millions of users is TikTok? 500 million? A billion? I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's massive. It's
Over a billion users.
a billion users. There you
There
go.
you go.
So it's massive. It has a huge reach globally, and we saw that there was actually security concerns from the government that arose from TikTok. Um, India outright banned dozens of apps, including TikTok, from the country because they were concerned over spying
Yeah.
and data collection.
I
Because
mean, that's why Huawei was banned for a
yeah,
while.
yeah, exactly. They're not going to be able to build out their 5G infrastructure out here because they all of their equipment had, was sending information back, and these are all state-owned countries. So it's or our companies.
State-sponsored attacks, yeah.
No. The state owns the companies. Is my
Oh,
point.
right.
They have to report that information back. Otherwise, they get rid of the leadership and install someone who's willing to do it in the
Right.
company. So yeah, and so just to kind of tie up my point there. So they have TikTok. They have these other ways that they're gathering information from federal employees. So I mean, the way I see it is they're just kind of building this big, massive database. I mean, they have been for years,
Right.
and they're deploying some type of machine learning to um, swarm through all that data. And what are they going to do with it? I don't know. I mean, tons of different things. What I do know for certain is that our country isn't quite prepared to handle an assault like this. Yeah, we've got planes, we've got nukes, we've got aircraft carriers. Those are great for conventional warfare. Um, Not great in the sense of war, but this new era of warfare, information warfare, is heavily tied to security. And I think there was an article that was written where the Homeland Security had mentioned that our deficit in trained security professionals in the U.S. was a national security risk. So,
Interesting. So
yeah.
here's something. By the way, you were talking about how they are required to give that information over to the Chinese government.
Mhm.
So I just looked this up over here. It's actually part of a 2014 counter-espionage law, which is kind of ironic. A Chinese counter-espionage law, which
You're
says
still
that.
showing Reuters.
Um, oh yeah, I'm just reading this off the side here. I guess I could pull it up.
Yeah, yeah, pull it over.
It says when the state security, when the, where is it? Let's see. When the state security organ investigates and understands the situation of espionage and collects relevant evidence, the relevant organizations and individuals shall provide it truthfully and may not refuse. So basically, what they're
Hmm.
saying is under the 2014 counter espionage law, at any point they just come in and say, "Give me all your data," and you can't say no, and that's just it. That's pretty.
Exactly, and that's the risk, right? So,
Yep.
anything else on SolarWinds, Josh?
Not so far, but I'm sure we'll be talking about it next week.
I can't wait for it. Well, thank you so much for putting this all together and walking us through.